Morning, Naomi here for another video. You know what? I thought I would do something that I didn't think I was going to do. But of late it has been making a stronger impression on me that maybe I should share my pearls with you, my precious pearls, my dreams that I've kept to myself. There was probably a total of 5 people that knew my dream from 2004. My mother, my sister, and then my mother handed it on to a brother in at the meeting place that we had attended at that time, to which I spoke on briefly. And then 2 of my husband's cousins I shared with, who are just sweethearts. So anyway, but even then, I didn't share the entire dream that I had in 2004. And I think in every case I had held back a part that confused me at the time. It doesn't confuse me now, but it did at the time back in 2004. And so I had kind of held back on sharing this portion of the dream with anybody. And but in the meantime, I have shared, I think in the last 2 or 3 years, I've shared it with my sister and my mother. So this is the dream that I had in 2004. I'm not going to tell you what I've concluded that it means, but I will tell you this before I tell it to you. About 2 months after I had the dream in 2004, and I say it was a late spring, early summer of 2004, I probably had this dream, and I knew it was a dream from the Lord. Because it was in Technicolor. It wasn't like any other dream I'd ever experienced in my life, so I knew it was of significance and that I needed to pay attention to it. And no matter how hard, I couldn't forget it. You know, it was always there, right, in my mind's eye, as we say. And so it was never far from my thoughts. But about 2 months after I had the dream, because for 2 months I had said to the Lord, looked just like somebody went by. I said to the Lord, I said, could you please tell me what this dream means? And so the Lord took me to, and I should have had it marked. Sorry, folks. It's Habakkuk. She took me to Habakkuk. The Spirit took me to Habakkuk 2. Verse 3, and this is what the Lord said to me at that time, back in 2004, after I had this dream. She said, for the vision is yet for an appointed time, but at the end it shall speak and not lie. Though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, and it will not tarry. Now, what I failed to understand at the time is that the Lord's time frame is a lot different than ours. Totally different than what you begin to understand. And this dream did begin to speak to me at about 2013, 2014. That's when the dream began to speak. But I didn't fully comprehend it, probably, and even yet I'm still beginning to comprehend it to a depth that I wasn't willing to comprehend it to. So it takes faith to believe that the Lord is telling you things about yourself that you have to believe. Now, you can choose to believe them or not, all right? That's one thing I've come to understand. But the time frame of showing and revealing the dream to me was over a much larger period of time, or more extended period of time, than I realized. I figured when the vision was going to speak, it was, boom, going to speak in a day or in a week. But that wasn't how the Lord revealed that to me. It was a very slow opening when the Lord did begin to reveal. And yeah, in 2011, I began to search for deeper understandings, but it really wasn't until 2013 or 14 that I really began to hit on the things that I needed to hit on, that began to show this dream to me. So this is the dream that I had. For anybody who may be looking for a confirmation of maybe a dream they had that's similar to it or something. So I was in the desert in this dream, all right? And I was a little, and there's no other way to say it, I was a little black girl. I was me, but I was very dark. I mean, excessively dark. And I was probably about 10 to 12 years old in this dream, somewhere in that range. And I was in a very stark I mean, starchy, stark, white robe. All right, but it was all one piece. It pulled over the head, and it had a neck that come like this, and the shoulders kind of moved, you know, because the robe was too big for me, and it kind of come down like that at the end, just below my knees, right? And it was starchy white and stiff, right? And I was a little girl, and in this desert there was this huge ocean of water. That's the only way I can explain it. It was a huge ocean of water off to the side of where I was. And in the opening of the dream, now I'll tell you this honestly, it's been so long, I do not recall if the end of the dream was the beginning of the dream or the beginning of the dream was the end of the dream. I can't remember if it opened up with this scene or if it ended with this scene and then it opened up with the dream I'll tell you on the end, or the second part of the dream on the end. So I really honestly, I can't remember. I tend to think the end was the beginning, is what I think, but I can't remember because it's been so long now. And I did write it down, but I wrote it down in a very convoluted, hard to understand way because I was worried somebody would find my dream, like my husband, and read it and like, what is this supposed to be type thing. So I was very kind of paranoid, and so I didn't write it down with the clarity that I should have wrote it down with, but I still remember it with clarity. I just don't remember if the end is the beginning and the beginning is the end. That's the only part I still can't remember clearly, but I remember the dream. So I was in the desert. There was this huge body of water that was like an ocean off to the side of this garden that I was in. Now, I was playing in this water. I was bent down and I was doing this in the water, and the water was so clear and crystal clear, and I was playing in the water. I was bent down and I was playing, and I was so fascinated with this water. And then I heard the voice of God. Now, I didn't hear it as a male and I didn't hear it as a female. I just knew it was God speaking to me. And I stood up and I looked up at the sun. Now, I'm not promoting the sun as God. I'm just saying I heard God, and I stood up and I looked up at the sun. Now, the sun was a big ball of yellow. It was a big yellowish, orangish sun. It didn't have flames coming around. It was just a nice big ball in the sky, and there was no heat coming off it on me. I wasn't hot and I wasn't cold, but I knew the Lord was speaking to me, and the sun wasn't at noonday, right? It was about at 11 o'clock at this time. And so I stood up, and the Lord gently chastised me and said, shouldn't you be about your work? And so now it shifts to the next scene. And in this scene, I have a ladder and I have a watering pot. Now, this is the garden that I'm in. All right. It was just a strip that ran for miles and miles and miles and miles and miles in the desert until it disappeared out of sight. And the width of it is very hard to judge the width that it was. It was probably no more than, oh my gosh, probably no more than 25 to 35 feet wide, maybe. It might have been wider than that. But in this garden was these lilies, and they were an orange lily without exception. Every one of them was an orange lily, okay? And it looked like it had been lightly dusted with gold, okay? These beautiful, and they were everyone perfect without exception, and everyone had a gold center without exception. Now the thing is they weren't planted in the ground, all right? Because in this strip of garden that went on for mile and mile, it was a lattice, is what I believe was under these lilies. But there were so many lilies, you just couldn't see the lattice for all the lilies. And they were vined. They grew as a vine together. They didn't grow individually. They didn't grow with a stem. They were vined on this lattice. And the lattice must have extended, oh gosh, 12 to 15 feet high maybe. Again, it's hard to tell. It was a dream. And my job was to water these beautiful, perfect, orange colored gold lilies. And I remember looking at them closely, and they had little droplets of water on them, or dew even, if you want to call it that. And they were perfect, without exception. There was none of them that had a flaw in them in any way whatsoever. And my job was to water these lilies. So I had the ladder, I had the watering pot, and I began to climb up the ladder to start watering from the top down. And I fell into the lilies. And the whole time I fell into these lilies, I was going, oh no, oh no, oh no, I've ruined it, I've ruined it. And just as soon as that happened, everything went right back to perfect. And what I took away from that at that time was that no matter what I did, because at that time I had issues, I was having issues with opening my mouth. Because where I went, they kept harping, you need to open your mouth and speak of the Lord. You need to open your mouth and speak of the Lord. Well, that just wasn't something that I did. And if I was going to do it, chances was I was going to stick my friggin' mouth and my friggin' foot in my mouth, because that's what I'm good at. And so I was having issues with it, and it was weighing on me. And so I felt that it was the Lord's way of saying, no matter what you do, you're not going to screw up my perfect will. It's going to be done regardless. All right? So while it was my job to water these lilies, there was nothing that I could do to harm them. But I also remember being so happy and content with my job, right? That it felt the closest thing to heaven that I could have ever gotten to. And I remember my thought at the time, and I'll share this with you, was that I wasn't good enough to get into heaven, but baby, this felt like heaven. I might have been out in the desert and had to water these beautiful lilies, but hey, I'll take it. This feels like heaven to me. And I remember I smiled through the whole thing. I had blue eyes. I believe I had my regular brown hair. And I was the typical little girl, looked like the typical little girl that I was when I was 10 or 11 or 12, it was somewhere in that age. And I also took away that the robe that I was in, while it was stiff and kind of big, it was something I had to grow into. So the second part of the dream was this, and this is the part that I didn't share for a very long time with anyone because it just so confused me. But the garden changed. There was no longer these lilies in the garden. There was these box individual gardens, and I don't know if you know what a railroad tie looks like, but they were rectangle box gardens, and it would be an intermittent rectangle, then there'd be a box, a square one, and then there'd be a rectangle. It would skip a few feet, and then it'd be a square one. It would skip a few feet, then it would be a rectangle one, and these were placed on the ground, and they were box gardens. And inside of these, they were not lilies. Inside of these were planted, they looked like pansies, but they were colored, without exception, yellow and white. And they were planted in. And they were much more sparse in how many was in a box. You would think they'd have been just, so many, but they were sparsely placed, or sparsely placed, so that they weren't like seamless, right? So you had one planted here, and you had one planted here, and you had one planted here, and one planted there. And without exception, they were white and yellow. And they were between a rectangle and a square. All right? Now, I was in this part of the garden. And I don't know how long it ran on. I don't remember looking in that direction. But I did look this way. And there was a man standing there. There was an old man standing there. He had fairly long gray hair. He had a long beard and a mustache. And his robe was a lot different than the one that I had on. His robe was an off-white. It was a beautiful robe. It was an off-white, and it was cinched at his waist, but it billowed in the wind. When the wind blew, it would billow. Sorry. How did you stop? Sorry, my computer's acting up. So when the wind blew, his robe would billow, right? And it suited him, right? It moved with him, and it was pleated, right? It was a really nice robe. And my first thought when I looked at this man was, what is Moses doing here with me? That was my first thought. And I walked up to Moses as this little girl, and I could look out through his eyes. This is the part that totally confused me. I had no idea why I was able to do this. But I could walk up behind Moses, and I could look out through his eyes. And when I did that, as Moses, I looked down at my feet, and they were just over the edge of the garden, and I could see my big toes, and they were on the sand of the desert over this line that defined the garden. And I had no sandals on, but my big toes, I remember looking down at them, and they were out on the desert sand. Well, now the desert sand was wet, all right? And there was like a whole lot of people had walked in that desert floor, is what it looked like. But it was all wet. And my thought was, oh, it's been watered with the tears of the saints. That was my first thought in the dream, as me looking out through the eyes of Moses. And as I looked past this desert that had been watered with the tears of the saints, I saw a mountain in the distance. And I remember thinking it as Moses, or as this little girl, I don't know, that it was one of two things for me why I didn't go. I was either too afraid to go to that mountain in the distance, or two, I was being restrained and held back in some way. Now, that was that portion of the dream, all right? I tend to think that was the portion that came first, but I'm not 100% sure. It's been since 2004 that I had this dream. And the color of lilies, I know I was to take, it was so distinct in the dream, this color, that I was to take note of that color. And I know that. And the fact that they were lilies, all right? Which eventually led me to my study in Song of Songs. And I could not understand why I was a little black girl in this dream. That totally confused me. I have to tell you, because I did not know anything about the Shulamite. I did not know. We had never really studied Song of Solomon. It wasn't a book that I looked at. I may have skimmed it. But I in no way correlated this dream when I had it to Song of Song. In no way. I only began to correlate that in 2013, 2014. That's when the vision began to speak to me. Now, I won't tell you what I've concluded that it means. But that's that. All right, and I see of late that the color orange has really been popping up in a lot of dreams, which I find curious, because back then I didn't do my homework. I only started doing a lot of research 2011, and then really heavy in 2013 and 14. I really began a deep study in a lot of things that. So it was a slow kind of thing for me. Orange, I discovered probably quite recently, ain't been that long, means it's a color of separation. It means you've been separated, you've been called out. It means also the power of God. It means, let me see here. I wrote a bunch of things that they say it means. Whether it does or not, I don't know, but I wrote them down. So they mean, just a second, it means praise, warfare, passion, power, fire of God, harvest season, fruitfulness, and joy. These are some of the colors, the symbolism, the meaning of the color orange, I guess. And I had found separation. It's a color of separation. And so that's the orange. And it's interesting. because in the movie Infinity War, Avengers Infinity War, the Soul Stone is orange. So I wonder if these orange lilies weren't meant to signify souls. Okay? I wonder that too. So that's that dream. I'm going to share two others with you. Alright? So in 2013 or 14, since 1992, I've seen the number 1111, and I've seen a lot, along with a lot of other numbers. But in the beginning, it was 1111. And I didn't really do a lot of research and homework on that till about 2012, 2013. I started really looking into its meaning. And a lot of it was very negative in the beginning. It was, well, if you're seeing 1111, it means you're wicked. You should walk away from that number whenever you see it. And it was just negative. And so I said, well, I can't count on these to really show me anything. I have to really rely on the Lord and on the Word. And so I knew numbers come from the Lord. I knew all could be positive or negative. It's like the number 666. It's not bad in and of itself. It just means in that case in Revelation, it's talking to the wicked covenant. So it's telling you the number 666 actually represents a covenant. And that can be righteous, it can be good, or it can be wicked. So the number itself is not wicked. And it's no different with 11. So Joseph, I went and did my research from the Word, and I used the Spirit to guide me in that. And Joseph was the 11th son, and he was took down into Egypt for a specific purpose. And it was to deliver Israel, Jacob, and the sons and the daughters in a time of great famine. And so he went ahead. And it was to do with deliverance. The number 11 has to do with deliverance. It does. But I had done a lot of research on that. It means gateway. It looks very much like a gateway. The number 11 does. A gate, an opening, or a closing. So I did a lot of homework. I have a lot of information on various studies that I did over time on it. But they still didn't tell me the things that I really wanted to know. And so I got down on my knees one night in 2013 or 14. I got the note somewhere. And I said, Lord, if there's any way that I am permitted or allowed to know what the number 11 means, can you please show it to me in a dream? Now, I'll be honest, I didn't expect to get out of it what I got out of it, but I was very sincere. And so I went to bed that night and I had a dream. And I was sitting in a classroom with other students, and we had the Bible opened, and our professor walks in the class, and he turns to the class and he says, today's study will be on this. And he writes, let's go to it. He writes this on the board. He writes Luke chapter 24 verse, and I couldn't have told you in a million years what that verse read, 9. He took me to Luke 24:9. That's what the professor wrote on the board. And when I woke up in the morning, I was like, I wonder what that verse reads. Watch what this verse reads. Alright? Luke 24:9. It says, and returned from the sepulchre, and told all these things unto the 11, and to all the rest. Wow. I said, well, the number 11's there. The Lord definitely wants me to look at it. And who had returned from the sepulchre? Well, it was the women. And who had appeared to these women and told them what to tell? Well, it was the angel of the Lord. It was the Lord telling them to go back to these 11 and tell them all that they had heard. And what did the 11 do? What did they do? They didn't believe them. They didn't believe them. They disregarded what they had to say. And yet they were the chosen method for the message. They were the chosen message after the resurrection for the message. That's what I got out of that. So you can dismiss that we women are understanding things for a reason. We're delivering a message and we have been appointed to do so. That's why the number 11 is there. That's not the only reason. So that was a dream I had. So I'm going to share a third one with you, and this will be the last one that I share. This is a dream that I had on, and I went to the calendars, and they're not all in full agreement, but it was Nisan 1, 2017, that I had this dream. And at the time, I'm going to be honest, I was studying the birthright at the time, and I didn't fully comprehend the meaning of the birthright and all that stuff, but I was beginning to understand some things. And the Lord gave me this dream. So in this dream, I was instructed to take a piece of stone and to polish just the very top of it, but to leave the rest of it unpolished, so just in the rough. So just the top of it, which was about like that. It was an odd shape little thing, this portion of stone, and I was instructed to polish it. And so after I got done polishing just this top portion of the stone, the bottom half looked like this, right? It looked like a half of an anchor is what it looked like, the bottom portion, and it's rough. And the top part, I had polished it, and it was this strange red, pink, purplish colored stone. It's really hard to describe it. And I didn't know what the stone's name was. And in the next scene, it had been inserted in my belly, off to the far right of my belly. And it was just healing around the stone, because the rougher part of the stone had been set in my belly, in my womb, is the only thing I could think of. Now, when I got up in the morning, I started looking for this stone color, what it was that I had been instructed to polish, because I didn't know what it was. And it turns out the closest that I could kind of come to it was what an uncut ruby looked like, right? So if you go in and you look for an uncut ruby, it's very different than one that's been cut. And to me, that's what I always thought a ruby was this diamond-y light red thing. But it's not. An uncut ruby looks very different. And so I didn't realize I had been told and instructed to polish this ruby, this uncut ruby, and it had been set into my belly. Now, I did a lot of research on the birthright. And what I come to understand about the birthright is when God placed the bow in the sky, it was a symbol of the covenant that God gave to man. Now, in a bow, in a rainbow, there's 7 colors in rainbow. And it represents the 7-fold spirit that's given in covenant. That 7-fold spirit is feminine. There's 7 feminines in that. They're all female. They're not male. And you can find information in the Bible that will back that up. Now, I'm just going to give a brief portion here. But your real old patriarchs is where you're going to find some of your lessons that we've lost sight of. And one of your best patriarchs to really go to is Abraham. And in Genesis 21, you'll find a sneaky little reference in there. And it is a reference to the 7-fold spirit, is what it is a reference to. And you're going to find that in Genesis 21. All right, I think that's where it is. So this is what it says. Let me see if I can find the section that I want to. Okay, and it starts at 22. All right, it says Abraham makes an agreement with Abimelech. Okay, so we'll just read and then I'll be done here. Okay, verse 22. And it came to pass at that time that Abimelech and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, spake unto Abraham, saying, God is with thee in all that thou doest. Verse 23. Now therefore swear unto me here by God, that thou wilt not deal falsely with me, nor with my son, nor with my son's sons, but according to the kindness that I have done unto thee, thou shalt do unto me, and to the land wherein thou hast sojourned. Verse 24. And Abraham said, I will swear it, Verse 25, and Abraham reproved Abimelech because of a well of water. This is important, allegory, which Abimelech's servant had violently taken away. And verse 26, and Abimelech said, I would not who had done this thing, neither didst thou tell me, neither yet heard I of it, but to today. So he's saying, I didn't know about this incident. I'm just barely hearing about it today. So it was not at my hand that this took place. So verse 28, and Abraham set out, it says 7 ewe lambs, which are females, of the flock by themselves. Now, when you go in and you do some research on this particular translation of where the term ewe pops up, okay? In some of your research, you may come across, you may not, okay? It depends on how much studying you do. But in a portion of research that I came across, it says that it's probably been mistranslated here as ewes. And it should probably have been rendered she-goats at this time. It should have read 7 she-goats, okay? Well, why do I point at she-goats all the time? Well, I'll just go through it real quick. In Genesis 15:9, in the Abrahamic-Sarah covenant, and it is an Abrahamic-Sarah covenant, it's not just an Abrahamic covenant, it's Abraham-Sarah covenant. There's a she-goat mentioned in there, all right? Now that she-goat you begin to understand as the covenant of the Lilies, or the she-goat covenant, as it's called, the more study that you do in that. She appears in Song of Song as the Shulamite that shepherds a little flock of she-goats that then is later identified as the daughters of Zion. Well, in Song of Songs, we'll read this verse right quick. I marked it here. Well, I say I marked it. I guess I lost my page. It says this in 6:9. It says, my dove, my undefiled, is but one. She is the only one of her mother. She is the choice one of her that bare her. The daughter saw her and blessed her, and yea, the queen saw her. And there's no such thing as concubines in the heavens. Don't care what it renders here. But then what we find out in, where is it? I just had it. 3:11 is this. This is what it says. It says, go forth, O ye daughters of Zion. All right? These are your she-goats. These are your lilies. And behold, King, not Solomon, Christ, with the crown, that's the daughter, that's the one daughter of Zion, wherewith her mother, or his mother, and it's the mother that does the crowning, it's the queen that finds the queen. It's not, she can't leave that responsibility to the son, and she can't leave it to the father. It must be done by the queen mother, all right? Because she knows what is required of the queen. So, wherewith his mother crowned him in the day of his espousal, and in the day of the gladness of his heart. So these are your virgins that you're going to find reference in Psalm 45 of the bride when she's brought to her groom. Okay? So, and that she-goat, again, from Genesis, these 7 she-goats that we're looking at, because that's what the proper translation is, or should have been, also appears in Leviticus 17, which again has been mistranslated as a he-goat. So they say 2 he-goats. No, the he-goat has to die. The she-goat has all the sins of the nation of Israel placed upon her head, and she is set apart. She's set to roam to and fro in a land not inhabited. That's a desert. Because she's not allowed to inhabit this body, because she was rejected by the first Adam. That's the covenant in view. Okay? That's a brief overview of it. Okay. So here, let's keep reading why he did this. Okay. So verse 28, and Abraham set 7 ewe lambs of the flock by themselves. Verse 29, and Abimelech said unto Abraham, what mean these 7, not ewes, but these 7 she-goats, which thou hast set by themselves? Verse 30, and he said, for these 7 she-goats shalt thou take of my hand that they may be a witness unto me that I have digged this well. So you know what you've got there? You've got a representation of the Spirit bearing witness to the truth. All right? That's what that's showing you. And that sevenfold Spirit, which is your various colors in the rainbow, is God's covenant made to mankind, which was rejected. And God tells us in Isaiah 59, I give you in covenant my Spirit with the words. So I don't know how anybody can see that this is not connecting us. And when it speaks of the sheep and goat judgments, you're talking about your male rulers, your he-goats, who are your mountains of the world that Mother says over and over again. For anybody who bothers to go in and trace down these words and their meanings, she's talking about the he-goat rulers who were put in place by the Holy Spirit that he chose a covenant with. And she says, my rightful rulers. And you're going to find that rightful headstone in Zechariah 4. She says, I'm going to take these he-goat mountains and I'm going to beat them small like chaff, and I'm going to blow them away in the wind, and I'm going to burn out the root that they're established on. That's the Holy Spirit. That's a promise that she makes to her daughters. That's a promise that she makes to her beloved son. And she's called out. It says, many are called, few are chosen. Well, the few that are chosen are these daughters that are able to pick their heads up and to see through the lies. You see, Mother as a queen knows what it takes to be a queen, and she can't have a weak queen. So she calls them her strong ones. And they're represented as the she-goat in the Abrahamic Sarah covenant. And they must be willing to pick their head up and see through the lies. and that's her test. If she can't see through the lies, then she can't protect her king. She can't. That's what that shows you. So I'll finish this. It says, he said that I have digged this well. Wherefore he called that place Beersheba, because there they swear, both of them. Okay? And thus they made a covenant at Beersheba. Then Abimelech rose up, and Phicol, the chief captain of his host, and they returned into the land of the Philistines. And this is where we made a reference to the grove. And Abraham planted a grove in Beersheba, called there on the name of the Lord and everlasting God, and Abraham sojourned in the Philistine land many days. So, see, Abraham called on Mother God. He knew God as Mother. He did not know God as Father. I don't care what anybody says. That's what that's indicating. He knew Mother. And that's who his covenant was supposed to be with, in agreement. And that's what circumcision represents, that he will not make a covenant with the Holy Spirit. So, but that she-goat is there in your Abrahamic Sarah covenant for a reason, and she's not there to be ignored. She's, if you look at the game of chess, my husband, my son plays chess, not me. But for anybody who doesn't realize this, in the game of chess, your most powerful piece on the board is your queen, but your most precious piece is your king. And your queen can move in any direction that she needs to protect her king. All right? So she's your most powerful piece, but he's your most precious piece. And that's what the queen is appointed to do. She's appointed to protect that king, this king. And one of her attributes is the ability to see through man-made lies. This is one of her attributes. I don't care what anybody says. If she can't see through fallen theology, then you are no good as a queen. You're no good. Mother's looking for a queen that can move in any direction required to protect her king. He's precious. He's the mantle that we're going to work through and wear. And you see, when you look at that she-goat that was set apart to roam to and fro in a land not inhabited, she was without a body. She could not work through a body as if it was hers to wear. She had to find people to work through, to be able to bring the message of heaven to man, because man had cast her out, didn't want her, wanted a covenant with the Holy Spirit. So that's what you're looking at. And that's the three dreams that I wanted to share. I don't know if there'll be you know, somebody that will get a confirmation maybe out of what I've dreamed. I tend to think I'm not the only one that received a dream like this back in 2004. I tend to think that there was a bunch called out and possibly received a very similar dream to what I received. I think we're in a race. That's what I think. And I think just like there was one male that's going to be crowned, she's the queen. We're in a race, a separate race from the men. And the men was and he was chosen by the Spirit, and he will be crowned king with the queen. That's what we're looking at. And the final leg, or the final race, is run by a group that is called out. She calls them her strong ones, and they're in a race for the crown, for the queen. All right, that's what I think. You don't have to agree with me, and most won't, because the world hates anything feminine. I mean, they're erasing any comments online, mind you, to do with feminine, and people can't pick their head up and think there's something wrong with that. My gosh, we got 3 masculines in the heavens. All the angels are male, and what's about to appear on earth is another male. Really? And you don't have the ability to reason that there's something wrong with that man-made theology? No wonder Mother says they're my strong ones. No wonder she says that. So I wanted to share that. And I think we all need to understand, no matter what positions we're going to hold in the heavenlies, in the new heavens and in the new earth, we're just going to be, I think, astonished at the gifts and you know, at what great God Almighty is going to give to each one of God's children. I think we're just going to be wowed by it. Without exception. Without exception. I don't see anybody being disappointed. And yeah, there's loss of, you know, this and that in the New Testament. I just don't see it that way. I mean, I think we're going to be so thankful for what we're given by God. I just don't see there being any sadness about that. So excuse me. May the Lord bless my brothers and sisters. I hope this dream is a confirmation for some others out there. And I hope you all have a blessed day.